What also came part of my diagnosis was the anger. So I went through the initial kind of being scared and worried, then feeling very relieved, and then feeling incredibly angry that I had gone through all of my life not knowing, and the impact that that had had on me emotionally and on my mental health. Do you know what the biggest thing is? And I think it didn't have to have been that hard. It was really, really hard, and it didn't need to have been that hard. And that's the bit I think that you feel sad about and cross about and frustrated by, is it didn't have to have been that bad.
Welcome to the Choice Space podcast. I'm Dr. Lee David, GP, CBT therapist and author. Today's episode explores how dyslexia can shape family life and how we can make everyday choices that support well-being and confidence at home, at school and beyond. Dyslexia sits within the wider neurodivergent landscape alongside ADHD, autism and other ways that brains think and learn differently. It's much more than reading or spelling. Dyslexia can also influence memory, attention, organisation and the rhythm of our daily routines. And I've linked some recent studies in the show notes if you'd like to explore this further. When dyslexia goes unrecognised, it can lead to self-doubt, reduce confidence and make family life more stressful. Yet many people also bring great strengths, including creativity, insight and social understanding that can thrive when they're valued and recognised. In today's episode, we're going to look at how families can nurture those strengths and find balanced, practical ways forward. I'm joined by Liz Evans, the Untypical occupational therapist and parent with lived experience of dyslexia and the wider neurodivergent world, to share what this could look like in everyday life. Welcome, Liz. Could you start by introducing yourself and your background?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. So my name is Liz Evans. I am the Untypical OT, also known as an occupational therapist for quite a long time, 24 years probably now. My career has meandered around from working in child and adolescent mental health to adult mental health in various different roles and things that I've done. And as you said, I am a parent. I'm a dyslexic parent. I'm a solo parent to two boys. One is neurotypical and one is neurodivergent.
Could you start by explaining what an OT does? I think people sometimes get confused. They sometimes think it relates to occupational work. And
Yes.
Actually, I think it's much broader than that.
It is. So we often get very confused. But actually what an occupational therapist is we look at occupations, and that isn't, as you just rightly said, Lee, it isn't about work. So occupations are the things that we do every day. So it might be things that you do that you enjoy doing. So for example, mine's like, I love motorbiking. So that's one of my occupations. It makes me slightly maybe more kind of the untypical OT. It might be my parenting is an occupation. It could be just looking after myself. So being able to those kind of self-care skills, as well as work and the skills that you might need to do for work. An occupational therapist, I think, is a very positive job. Occupational therapy. We look at all the things that people are really great at and all their skills. We also look at the things that they might find a bit more tricky. And then we find ways to support them to do the things that they want to do and need to do, which I think is always a nice bit that we get to do, actually. It's about making people as independent as possible, but also being able to do what they want to do and creating health and well-being in those people. We might work with kids and they do sensory stuff, or it might be more medical kind of stuff. So it might be things like if you're on the orthopedic wards, if people have hurt their hip, we might come in and put different equipment in. But all the time, fundamentally, what we're looking at is how can people do the things that they want to do and need to do.
So I love this idea, actually, that occupation is so much more than work. And that sounds very fundamental to how, as an OT, you'd approach people. And I think we all need to maybe think about that more broadly in that kind of holistic view about what matters to me and what things really do I need to get done to live effectively in my daily life.
Absolutely. And I think we get very wonky, I think, is my best description of it. I think, as you become adults, things become very focused on work, and we need to work to be able to pay for things and to survive. But actually what often we lose as we become adults is the fun side of things, the things that we enjoy and that we love. And I think also with the work that I do with parents is that we often enter into a parenting role and it becomes all about our children. Myself included, I've gone through periods of time when people have said to me, what do you enjoy doing? And I've thought, I don't know. I've lost that out of my life. And actually, when it becomes unbalanced like that, that's when we know we head towards kind of ill health, or it affects our mental health and our well-being, is when we become very stuck in one section of our occupations and we don't look at how they balance. I suppose, again, that's what OT is about creating some of that balance that we bring in, not just necessary, but also the fun and the joy bits as well.
Definitely. And almost making those necessary rather than, I think people often view them as a bit of a bolt on. I'll do something enjoyable when I've got a bit of time, but I need to get everything else done first. And if you view it as an occupation, then actually we need to put as much energy into those sides of life as we do into all the jobs, the pressures, the stresses, all those things that we put so much time and effort into. And maybe we do need to be starting to treat our recharge time, our enjoyment time, our connection time as an occupation.
Yeah. It's the easiest thing to drop. Most people, when things get tricky and things get a bit hard, the nice stuff drops. It's the first stuff to go. And understandably, when we get time constraints and things like that, but we have to stay quite conscious, I think, about how do we make sure that we keep those elements as part of our daily lives, because without them, actually the stress and the difficulties, it's harder, I think, then to move out of those when we've lost all the joy and the things that we enjoy.
So as an OT, as a parent, and also as a dyslexic person, how has living with dyslexia influenced how you see the world and how you move through your daily life?
So dyslexia, it's a big sigh having of dyslexia. I wasn't actually diagnosed with dyslexia until it was a couple of years ago, and I'm in my 40s. School was a really, really hard place for me, and I was always kind of described as the anxious person, like within my family, by teachers. I was an anxious child. Looking back now, I think I know why, but it wasn't diagnosed at that point. I kind of fumbled my way through school, kept a low profile, kept down out of the way, thought I was not very bright, really struggled with school generally. And as I say, would just keep out of the way. Both my parents, funnily enough, were teachers. So I think there was a lot of masking on my side and then a lot of extra support at home that I wasn't what, back in the day when I remember thinking about dyslexia, it was the kids that needed to be pulled out of class. They needed a lot of extra support. And I was kind of managing by working really, really hard. And I suppose there was different bits of my dyslexia that I now know is dyslexia that I didn't know was back then. Things like being really worried if a teacher asked me a question because I couldn't remember what they asked me. I would lose the first bit of the question, remember the last bit, or being given instructions. I couldn't hold all the instructions. So my working memory is pretty poor, and I struggle with my working memory quite a lot. So I think I did that, and I went into kind of secondary again, did a very similar thing, hid at secondary, kept out of the way. And I think I had picked things like PE, biology, arts, all that. So I didn't have to do much writing. And I think dyslexics are great at that. We will find a way around it. And I think sometimes I often think that that's how we're missed, is we are very creative. We do think outside the box. And when we come up against a problem, we go around it rather than try and find a way through it. And I think possibly that's why we mask so well, and we possibly are undiscovered, as well as now I think there's much more understanding around it and around the nuances of it. And that actually once you've met, I think like they say with autistic people, is once you've met one dyslexic person, you've met one dyslexic person. It affects all of us differently. Work and family life has been tricky with having a diagnosis of dyslexia. But having the diagnosis was probably one of the best things I have ever done. It has given me a sense of understanding of why I do things and why things are difficult. But it's also allowed me to put strategies in so I know why it's difficult, which I didn't know before. I think I just thought if I just worked harder, if I was just a bit cleverer, if I just did it a bit better, it would be okay. But actually, it wasn't that. I needed strategies in place. But until you know where the difficulties are, where do you put the support, if that makes sense? And I think more and more along with the work that I do, because the majority of my work is with parents now, and supporting parents through burnout and things like that, is that knowing about how dyslexia impacts us as a parent. because it does have an impact on my parenting as well in loads of different ways. But also if you're a parent, maybe in an additional needs family, or when you're having to deal with big systems that involve lots of writing and lots of reading, how do you manage all of that as well? There's a huge amount to take on, and self-esteem side of things is really hard. I think that's the biggest impact I think I've had.
There's a whole lot of information there that was really, really useful for us to hear. I was hearing something about initially masking and the toll that that takes. And we hear a lot about the impact of masking in many different types of
Yeah.
neurodivergence, and how I think masking has a bigger impact on mental health than the actual neurodivergent itself, because it's how we start to perceive ourselves and trying to compensate for areas of challenge, not through finding positive ways to embrace and recognize and find acceptance and understanding, but more through trying to hide those aspects of ourselves, and perhaps bringing a sense of shame around the fact that they're there. So we know that there's something we find hard, but it's not really been discussed openly. So we then try and pretend it's not actually happening. And that puts us under a lot of pressure. Is that something that you would relate to?
Hugely, hugely. I think through school, absolutely. But then also being a professional, I have this memory of when I first started being an occupational therapist, and back in the days before it was all computerized, of course, and we used to have to handwrite our notes, is that I was made to write my notes in draft first to be checked by a senior before they could go into the notes. And that was soul destroying. That was awful. And I was very ashamed of the way that I wrote. I didn't want anyone to see how I wrote. I would avoid it at all costs. I'm much better talking than I am writing. I'd often feel quite frustrated that I couldn't get what was in my head out. I knew what I wanted to write, but it just never came out on the paper right. And people didn't understand what I was trying to say. Funny enough, I managed better as I became, when I got into a professional role, because the style of writing that we have as professionals is much more bullet point. It's not kind of all this flowery language. And I actually thought I prefer this, and I would bullet point and just name what I saw, rather than having to get very creative in how I wrote. But now I suppose in the job that I do I do a lot more work online with social media, and I've really struggled with that. And that's taken a lot of getting used to, trying to find where I feel comfortable with that, and owning being dyslexic. Why I put it in everything, I'm dyslexic. I am. And I've had to do presentations. One of the first things I will say is I'm dyslexic. There are going to be typos and things in this presentation, because I, over the years, have heard other professionals, friends, all sorts of people say they're like the grammar police. And somehow they think if you've got poor grammar or you poor writing, then you are somehow intellectually not as bright as other people. And that brought a lot of shame for me, that I felt I wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough to be an OT at times. I wasn't good enough to be a parent. I wasn't good enough. Just generally, I wasn't good enough. And I think, like you said, huge impact on my mental health and my well-being and anxiety levels for me. And it's only been since finding ways to kind of, it's easier for me to express myself. Like, I run a podcast like you do, Lee. And if you'd asked me back, say 20 years ago, you'll be running a podcast, I'd have laughed. And if you had seen me 20 years, probably maybe more, 25 years ago at school, I would say probably a lot of people would have looked at me and thought there is no way. I was shy, I was quiet, I never spoke in class ever. If I had to speak, I would feel sick about talking. So not only did I know I found the writing difficult, it then started to seep into everything, because I didn't really understand, I don't think, what it was I was finding difficult. I just thought it was just me, and communication for me was just difficult. So I stopped, I think. I just became very quiet, very withdrawn. And felt my opinions didn't really count, and I had no way really of being able to express them.
So we get that intersection between these negative self-beliefs that we develop when we don't have a neutral way of labelling my experience. So I find it difficult to write things down at this point. There are some things I find it hard to express in writing, becomes, does this mean I'm not as clever I'm not as good as other people? And so we develop these really negative self-judgments, which obviously undermine our confidence, and they trigger what you're describing, that really difficult experience of feeling shame in professional environments, if you feel like we might be exposed to others, when you had to write in front of seniors and for fear of being judged for not being able to do it somehow well enough, whatever that means, and how that can link to then emotions as well. And I would see a lot of people who experience threat response. So we get a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So we get flight, I can't do this, it's too hard, I'm going to shut down. And freeze also, I've got no words at the moment. I feel unable to contribute. I've been asked a question and I just feel completely blank. And then we also have that fawn response of, I need to make sure people don't judge me negatively. So I'm going to have to be really nice. I'm going to have to look as amazing as possible to make sure. But it's not based on this lovely connection and feeling safe. It's based on, if they spot that I'm not as good as then I'm going to be exposed, and actually I could be rejected and shamed publicly, which would be obviously feel really, really threatening and difficult.
Yeah.
So it's not a positive connection exposed. It's driven by the threat response. Can you relate to those aspects of threat coming up when you are challenged in terms of communicating in ways that might feel threatening?
Absolutely. And I think, like you've just described, I think in school it was very much I froze. I just absolutely words wouldn't come out. I would trip over words. I remember those horrible times when they used to make you stand up with a book and read, and it would be Shakespeare-ly. It wasn't even proper English.
And see, that's almost impossible for all of us. I think everybody finds Shakespeare difficult.
It was just, and I remember them going around. It's funny, isn't it? You have these real vivid memories. And again, that's that kind of trauma stress response, isn't it? Is them going around in the classroom and knowing my turn was coming. And I'm following everybody thinking, okay, that's what that word is. And now, can I remember how to say that word when it comes to my time? So of course, now I know with my working memory, not a hope in hell. And then, of course, you'd have to stand up with this book and read it in front of the whole class. It was it was awful. I would feel physically sick. How I didn't become a non-school attender, I have no idea. I think, how I didn't start bunking off. I was too worried about getting caught, probably. But anxiety levels for me at school were up through the roof, probably at their worst there. And that threat response and feeling quite unsafe at times. And it's, it's like when you're at school as well, you don't want to look different. You just want to be like everybody else. And now I quite embrace the fact that I'm different, and that's quite cool. And I like that. And I can really settle into that. But as a kid, and when you're a teenager, that's not easy. You just want to be able to do your stuff, do your exams, and get out the other side. I hated school, hated it. And I think I still have those kind of feelings of threat. And I think, especially like the job that I do on social media, the writing side of it, I can spend hours thinking, how have I written that? Is that okay? And will somebody misunderstand what I'm saying? Because you know what it's like. Sometimes you just take a comma out, it reads completely differently. And grammar is, things like commas, I really struggle with that. So then I kind of try and use support systems to help me with that. But it's taken me a long time to settle into that, to be able to own it. And I think there is an element of owning it. Again, around my career, similar things. I've had people say things to me over time, or I've heard little comments about the way that something's been written, or I got told by a supervisor once about my report writing, that my report writing was unusual, and it was, I write how I speak. And I think, I don't do report writing now because I hate it, but now I work for myself, I could get right to not doing that anymore. But before, when I was, of course, in a more typical role as an OT, I had to report write. But actually, I started to get feedback from parents. I really like your style of report because I can understand it, because I was writing as I was talking. But I was a long time that I felt very shameful of the reports that I wrote. And that would put me into that, like you talk about, that fight, flight, freeze response, or fawning and trying to get alongside somebody and trying to pretend I was trying to be them. I would try and write reports like them. So I'd spend a long time reading other people's reports and thinking, okay, I just need to write like that. But that would take me forever, hours and hours and hours. And then, of course, I'm always on the back foot trying to catch up, doing loads and loads of work in my own time because I can't get it done during the day. And other people are banging out reports in, an hour, 2 hours. It would take me nearly all day to write reports. Hence, I don't do them anymore.
This is the choice pause, a short 2 to 3 minute tool you'll hear in every episode, each time with something different to help you pause, notice and choose your next step. These are practical tools drawn from my books and online wellbeing courses, and you'll find links to these in the show notes. Today's pause is about making space for connection and acceptance. Life, especially when neurodivergence is part of the picture, can easily become focused on managing, organising, coping, or keeping things on track. This pause invites a shift towards noticing moments of connection, care, and acceptance, both for others and for ourselves. Take a slow breath in and a longer breath out. Picture someone in your family or bring yourself to mind. Rather than getting caught up in what you need to get done next, notice one thing you genuinely appreciate about yourself or the other person. It might be a smile, an effort made, a moment of patience, or simply the courage to keep showing up. Hold that appreciation in mind for a few breaths. Notice what changes when you see this person or yourself through a lens of understanding, acceptance, and care. Maybe there's a softening, a small warmth, a loosening of pressure, or just a quiet sense of ease. Now ask yourself, what small choice could I make today that deepens that sense of acceptance and connection? It might be pausing before reacting, offering a kind word, or allowing things to be good enough for now. And take one more steady breath. Carry that feeling of connection and acceptance with you into whatever comes next in your day. It kind of sounds like you've moved towards a sense of self-acceptance, of knowing yourself and being more at peace with this is the me that I am, and perhaps finding more authenticity of being you, being the Liz version of doing writing and not trying to be these other people. And I think that's really important that we do develop our own voice, even if it is one that isn't exactly like others, but actually finding a way to express ourselves. It also sounds like earlier in your career, actually choosing a health professional role in some ways did help because it created some structure around writing that enabled you to not have to have some of the pressures of, for example, Shakespeare, but actually you could write in bullets. So there are choices around, well, what type of role am I going to take on that will actually maximize my strength? And I wonder if as an adolescent, if that's a lot harder, because I think we are wired, especially in adolescence, to try to fit in. There's a big driver to try and look like others. And there's a lot of social pressure to somehow fit in. And I see it in adolescents that I've worked with. It's really hard if people feel like they don't fit in. There's something inherently really difficult for young people around that. Is that something that you've experienced in family life, also in your OT work?
A lot of the work that when I worked more so with the kids, I did more kind of child and adolescent mental health work, is that I wouldn't pretend to be something I wasn't. And that was even before I was diagnosed dyslexic. I knew I was, but I felt it actually helped my relationship with those kids because I wasn't perfect. I wasn't holding, this is what you aspire to be, this perfect person. There's no such thing. And by being able to admit that and talk to kids about that, I think especially with the kids that we are working with, because they're struggling, that's why they've come to see us for whatever reason, that to find an adult going, I'm owning this, I've struggled with this, you're going to find words in here that and I'm going to need your help. And I think that's really, really important. And I think that actually helped me build connections. Like you were talking about earlier, that those stronger connections that actually when I was pretending to be somebody I wasn't building those proper connections. But actually once I started to go, this is me, then I think the connections did come. And from a work perspective with the kids that I worked with, I think that really helped. I still struggle more with the adults. I still feel sometimes, I think she's dyslexic, she's not going to be that good as an OT. And I have to do quite a lot of self-talk with myself around that one. And I think that's possibly, it's why I called myself the Untypical OT. I do work slightly untypical in the fact I work, the majority now is with parents, but it's also about me. and about the way that I work and the way that my brain works. It's not typical, it's untypical, and I'm okay with that. And it's really funny because I thought people would think, well, I don't want to work with her because she's called untypical or she's dyslexic. But actually, most of the time when I say I'm the untypical OT, people smile. And then they go, what's that about? And it gives me an inroad to be able to say, well, and whatever it is I kind of want to bring in, and it's usually around the dyslexia. And I found I've moved away from, I used to say I was dyslexic before I was diagnosed. I would say I was dyslexic as defense. So it was very much a protective mechanism. You can't say anything to me because I'm dyslexic. I would throw it out there and then hide behind it. Now I think I use it as it's a conversation. I'm dyslexic. I'm going to find that difficult. We have a bit of a laugh about it. I'm not worried about it, but I'm going to let you know that I find this bit difficult and I'm okay with that. And I don't feel judged. I may still be judged by people, but if I am, and they're not, I'm not the right person for them. And I've got very much, like you said, I've kind of got very much more comfortable in thinking, well, I am who I am. And if someone doesn't want to work with somebody that finds writing more challenging and that drives them wild, then there's loads of other OTs out there. Go find them. That's fine. But if you want to work in a different way, come work with me.
I think that sounds so lovely. And it sounds such a self-accepting approach to working with yourself and with other people. And to be able to be you, to bring that real humanity of this is what I bring, probably immense strengths and abilities and experience through navigating the dyslexic world and the neurodivergent landscape brings you a lot of empathy, awareness and recognition of other people's challenges. So in fact, it allows you to meet them in a real place where you're not somehow the expert above as much as a collaborative side-by-side approach where we can say, well, how could we approach this together?
Yeah.
And it feels like that would be really powerful. And I think you're right. We all have amazing strengths. We all have areas where perhaps we could develop. And I think accepting that and recognizing that that's okay feels like a really important starting point for developing on through life.
Yeah. And I think for me, the only regret I have about my diagnosis is I didn't get it earlier. That's the only bit. And I think I was quite shocked. I wasn't ready for the diagnosis and the emotions that came with it. One I thought before I had it was, what am I going to do if they say I'm not dyslexic? I'm a fraud. And actually, there's nothing wrong and it's just you. And I was terrified of that. It took me a long time to think, okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for an assessment. And I had to find the right person to do the assessment for me because I felt really, really vulnerable during that assessment. And having masked for 14 years, that by the time I came to do that assessment, my masking, we was so fully in place to let that down in front of somebody was really scary. And I don't think people are aware of that sometimes around diagnoses and thinking about all the emotions that do come with that. So one, I was terrified of the assessment and really frightened, and I had to work quite hard and had a great person that assessed me that made me feel comfortable to be able to let go of some of those strategies, because some of those strategies people don't even realize I'm doing. And I could have dodged my way through some of that it wouldn't have been picked up quite so easily. There was the relief when I got it that I thought, okay. There was a report that came through, which I laughed with the dyslexia assessor. You've given me a report. It's like 20 pages long. I'm dyslexic. So we did laugh about that. And she was saying, we're going to have to think of a way that I can get this done for adults, that it's more easy to digest. And I've had to go back. I read little bits of it and I do funny little things. Like I'll take bits of it and put it into things like AI for me and say, can you just explain this in a different way? Or can you bullet point this for me? And it will spit that back out and I go, oh, okay, yeah, I've got it. Or I'll use a family member and say, can you read this bit and just explain what they mean by it? Because I often get quite lost in what they're meaning. But what also came part of my diagnosis was the anger. And that bit caught me off guard. And it came later. So I went through the initial kind of being scared and worried, then feeling very relieved, and then feeling incredibly angry that I had gone through all of my life not knowing, and the impact that had on me emotionally and on my mental health. And the shoulda, coulda, woulda, you look back and I haven't got too stuck in that, but naturally we always go back and go, what could things have been different? Would I have been less anxious person? Would I have had, less maybe mental health needs around it? Could things have been different for me? But then I think, but it's probably maybe the person I am and the job that I do. And things like that. So, you know, I say, so shoulda, coulda, woulda. But that did catch me off guard, the anger side of it.
And do you think you were aiming the anger wider? Was it sometimes we blame ourselves, like I should have done something differently in it? Where did you direct your anger?
I think I'd had anger inside for such a long time at
Mm.
myself and being cross and frustrated that I couldn't do things that now it turned outward. I know I was masking, and I know during the assessment they said to me, "Your masking is unbelievable. The strategies you have got in place that has got you this far." And I got through university, but of course did OT with a massive practical element to it and less writing needs. So I moved around all the time thinking, okay, that doesn't feel right. Well, how can I flex around that? Which again is a dyslexic brain. But yeah, definitely, I think it was more outward. And I was cross that university had picked it up, but hadn't done anything about it. They kind of said to me, "Oh, do you think you could be dyslexic?" And I went, "No, not dyslexic." And I wish they had continued that conversation rather than kind of going to me, "Okay." And then, what was I? When you go to university, 18, 19,
Mm.
I'd had a horrible time at school. And someone saying to me now, "Do you think you're dyslexic?" No, I'm not. Well, why didn't someone talk to me a bit more about it
Mm.
and talk to me about what dyslexia meant? My perception of what dyslexia was at that point was, as I said, those kids being pulled out of school, out of classrooms, being taken outside to read. That didn't happen to me. So no, I'm not dyslexic, but I hate reading.
I wonder, sometimes being angry is really important for us. It gives us an energy and a bit of fight to respond to some of the challenges. So having some anger is quite an empowering emotion to hold. Sometimes it also comes hand in hand with the sense of grief, because actually when you look back, there can be a real sense of grief about some of the difficulties, and that sense of this could have been the coulda side, and actually needing to mourn a sense of some of the ease perhaps that we could have experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a loss. You do feel a sense of loss and mourning of what it could have been. I think, do you know what the biggest thing is? And I think it didn't have to have been that hard. It was really, really hard, and it
Mm.
didn't need to have been that hard. And that's the bit I think that you feel sad about and cross about and frustrated by, is it didn't have to have been that bad.
I would wonder if there's a real need to have felt supported, need to feel
Mm.
recognised, to feel understood, have that self-understanding and a sense of ease and kind of comfort in the world, which perhaps wasn't there. And it's just recognising that that's what this means. It means that I'm really wanting to feel secure and stable, cared about, understood.
Absolutely. And I think since getting the diagnosis, I think it almost gave me a sense of belonging. And actually I find there's a very strong neurodivergent community out there. And I always thought to be part of that, I had to be autistic or ADHD. But actually, I don't feel excluded from that being dyslexic. And we know being dyslexic is part of being neurodivergent. Our brains think differently. But actually, I feel very accepted in those communities. And that has given me a sense of belonging and of understanding, and has given me the strength to go, I am what I am.
Mm.
And there is nothing wrong with that. And the biggest, like we talked about the shame, the biggest place that I felt shame was through my work. I felt I wasn't as good as everybody else. I wasn't a great OT. And actually, I now know I am a really good OT. I just do it in a slightly different way. And actually, my dyslexic brain lends itself to OT brilliantly because I go outside of the box. So if people get stuck and they can't do something, actually my brain goes, "This is great. Right, I've got this. I can find a way around this." And like you said, it's much more working alongside people. I never come in as the expert. I'm not an expert. An expert in me, but I'm not an expert in anybody else. I just go alongside them, and they let me go alongside them for a little bit. And I'm part of that journey with them for a little bit, and being able to support them to not be dependent on me. I'm not the answer, is finding a way that they can go off and do it and be them. And I think getting my diagnosis has helped me do that. It's become a better OT to be able to work with people to do that.
sounds like you're starting to recognise a lot of your positive qualities and to integrate that into this wider sense of who I am, which is just a whole range of stuff, which we all are, complex mix. And that's what's lovely about it. What are some of the other positive qualities that you've been able to see in yourself? Perhaps you may have seen them before, but you can now link them more to dyslexia or your neurodivergent parts of yourself.
Problem solving is a big thing for me. I'm very creative. And I think what I've really kind of embraced for me as a parent is that my kids could outspell me at 6. My kids have got these amazing brains that are almost photographic with spellings. So they would bring home their spelling tests and some of them I couldn't read. I was having to ask them what words they were. And then we laugh about it, and they're pretty good, the kids. But we would do spelling tests, and they would spell the word to me, and I go, no, that's wrong, and they go, check again, Mum, and I'd be like, no, it's wrong, and they go, okay, and I go, spell it again, and they'd spell it, and I go, no, it's wrong, and they, no, it's right. Because I was listening to them spell and trying to read it, and then they were doing that horrible phonetic spelling that just blew my brains. So we laugh about it now and it's funny. But what it has done for us as a family is enabled my kids to see again that I'm not a perfect parent. I'm not a perfect adult. And actually, we work as a team. What they struggle with, so they come home and they're brilliant at their spellings, but they might come home and really struggle with an art project or something. I'm like, I've got this. I'm all over this. I've got this bit. They're like, Mum, I'm really struggling with this bit. And I think, how amazing is that I can show my kids that we've all got different strengths and different challenges. But together, we make an amazing team. And just because they're my kids, it doesn't mean we can't be part of a team. They don't have to be, me, the kind of, this is how we do it. And if you can't, then you're doing it wrong. They come up with great strategies that I haven't even thought of.
Just sounds like you do that with such a sense of humour and loving connection that it sounds like that would be just a fun experience. So returning from a spelling test, which could potentially be stressful for everybody, and possibly drilling on tests, how do you spell it? And you're turning it into something that actually there's space for it to be difficult. There's space for you to say, this isn't my strength. And then so there's a lot of modelling there about acceptance of self, but also learning and being willing to embrace it so that you're not stuck with, well, this is me, I can't change, but very much, well, let's find the way through together kind of approach. Does that feel right?
Yeah, absolutely. And another example is with my other son, and he checks with me all the time because my organisation can be a little chaotic at times. I've got like 3 diaries, and then I have to remember to look in them and all that kind of stuff. And I'll read text messages, but then not always take on all the information. I haven't remembered it. And numbers are a nightmare. So timings, telephone numbers, anything like that. And we'd got up and it was a football day. I'd gone out for a walk and come back, and I'd woken my son up and said, we need to get up for football. And he said, Mum, what's the time? And I said, oh, it's fine. We've got plenty of time. And he said, but we're playing away today. And I was like, no, we're at home. And he went, I don't think we are, Mum. Of course, I then double check and we are away, and quite a considerable time away. But he, let's say again, has just learned to kind of laugh with that. And I think there is a lot of laughter. We have learned to laugh when it goes wrong, because it does go wrong, and we find a way around it. I don't take it too seriously. And like you say, like with the spellings for me as a kid was atrocious. I remember over and over and over trying to remember them. And then I'd remember them in a list and then get to school, and then the teacher would take them out of sequence and then I couldn't spell them. I knew with my kids, there had to be an element of fun in there for it, because it was torturous spelling. I hated it.
And can you just share a few other tips and tools that you might use with some of the families that you work with that make life just a bit easier?
I do use AI quite a lot. AI for me, I use as kind of like a sounding board. And I don't mean that and it gives me advice. It structures things for me. So when things get really complicated, or maybe I'm trying to write something, like a letter for school or wherever, I will use AI. I'll talk into it, and then I'll just say to it, leave it as it is, but can you just structure the flow of this? And that makes a huge difference for me, is that I can kind of offload the bit that I'm not so great at, that it can organise and structure and get flow back into things for me. I'm really rubbish. We often run out of food because I'll forget to do the shopping. And you get to the day and you open the fridge and think, oh, crikey, I have no idea what I'm going to feed them. AI, I've found that if I put a list of ingredients into AI, it will come out with possible recipes for me to do. And it just takes like a mental load off. That I think when you're working as hard as you are when you are neurodivergent, when we're in a world that doesn't quite fit us, is there any way you can offload a bit of that cognitive load makes such a difference. And then I think the other one for me is finding other people that get it. Surrounding yourself with people that get it, that aren't going to be judgmental of you. And if those are the people that are around you, my advice is lead them somewhere else. It doesn't do you any good, I don't think, being surrounded by that, and trying to kind of let go of that idea of perfection. Because although you might be neurodivergent, what's normal? Have you met normal yet, Lee? Nor
I've
have
got
I.
no idea.
I don't know what it is I'm actually aspiring to be, because there is no such thing as perfect or normal. I'm just me. And being able to get comfortable with that as quickly as possible, I think, is the biggest key.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Liz. I'm just going to ask you to finish off by saying, if listeners were to carry away just 2 small ideas or choices from our conversation today, what would you want those to be?
I think the first one is be you. Don't try and be somebody else. It's just not worth it. You are you. You're never going to be that other person. Give that one up. And get comfortable with getting it wrong.
I love those. And I think I'd echo those. I probably would have said be you as well. And I'm going to add to that, connect with people who strengthen your sense of acceptance, where you feel that sense of belonging that you talked about, nourishing positive relationships that build us up, your tribe, and connect with them. So thank you again, Liz, for coming and talking so honestly. And I really enjoyed our conversation today.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Choice Space podcast today. I hope this conversation has offered a little more room to pause, breathe, and find your own way forward. If today's episode has been helpful, please download, follow, and share with someone who might value the space as well. I've linked the ways you can connect with Liz in the show notes, including links to her Instagram and her LinkedIn pages. I'd love to have you with me for the next episode. Until then, take care and keep making space for what matters most.